We're going deep today, really deep. We're talking Russia, Ukraine,
Hmm.
but not about the front lines, no. This is about something else, something more insidious. Desertion.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that doesn't make the headlines. Not really, but it speaks volumes. It gets to the heart of what this war is doing to people.
And the numbers are, well, they're pretty shocking, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Think about this. Projections say prosecutions for desertion in the Ukrainian army could be as high as 30,000 this year,
30,000.
just this year. And that's more than double what they saw in the 2 years before combined.
Wow, it's a huge number. It really shows you how widespread this whole issue is becoming. We saw that leaked document in the Kyiv Post, right? They're saying it could be closer to 60,000 facing charges since this whole thing started since 2022.
60,000.
Yeah, and the majority of those, just this past year.
It's easy to get caught up in the grand narratives, the strategies, the big picture. But those numbers, those are people. They paint a picture of exhaustion, of morale just disintegrating, of soldiers just pushed beyond their limits.
It's bound to happen when you've got guys, many of them young, conscripted, facing indefinite service and no clear way out. Can you imagine?
You read the accounts. Soldiers in near constant combat, overwhelmed, undersupplied, barely any time to rest. And it's not just the physical exhaustion, it's the mental toll.
Oh, absolutely. You're watching your friends die knowing you might not have the ammo to make a difference. It's almost too much to bear.
And that Al Jazeera report, the one about the conscription laws, it's like, once you're in, you're in. And that's it. No way out. It makes you question, at what point does self-preservation, survival, become more important than duty?
It's a question these guys are wrestling with, right? They love their country. They want to defend it, of course. But this is a different kind of war. It's brutal. It's grinding. There's no end in sight. What would you do?
And then you layer on the lack of basic supplies, the essentials. It just crushes morale. I read that CNN piece, soldiers crippled with guilt because they didn't have the ammo to engage.
I can't even imagine.
The fear, the uncertainty, it creates this environment where desertion, well, it starts to feel like an option.
And of course, you have the Ukrainian government stuck in this impossible position, trying to keep the army going, while these bigger issues are just eating away at morale.
A tightrope walk, to say the least. Tightening the screws, undodging the draft. They even lowered the conscription age. But at what cost? I mean, you start to alienate the very people you're trying to protect.
Right. And then there's the whole issue of Western aid, or the lack of it, depending on who you ask.
Right.
Ukraine's argument is that more support, better equipment, it all means relying less on manpower. But some analysts say this dependence on manpower, it's systemic, a problem long before this war started.
So maybe it's not as simple as just sending more weapons. Maybe it's about looking inward, fixing something fundamental within the Ukrainian military.
And that brings us to Russia, right? Because on the surface, you look at it, they've got the numbers, the manpower, but, well, it's not that simple, is it?
Not that simple at all. It's like they say, quantity has a quality all its own.
Right, but not always the quality you want, I guess. Their whole strategy, this whole meat grinder thing, throwing bodies at the problem, well, it's taking its toll. Replacing those losses, it's becoming a real struggle. We're seeing reports that they're way off on recruitment targets.
And the lengths they're going to, it's kind of wild, isn't it? They quadrupled enlistment bonuses. I mean, come on. How desperate do you have to be to offer that kind of money when the odds of, well, not making it back are so high?
It tells you something, doesn't it? People aren't as tempted by a big payday when they know what it might cost them. There's even whispers, that the Russian military is resorting to, well, let's just say, strong-arming people into service, not exactly winning hearts and minds.
Yeah, not a good look for morale. And those cracks are starting to show. Remember those reports from Ukrainian intelligence talking about mass desertions in their southern district? Even with the numbers, even on paper, keeping a lid on things, keeping the troops in line, it's not going so well, is it?
Not at all. It's like this conflict is laying bare a fundamental truth about war. Yeah, you need the weapons, the strategy, but none of it matters if the people fighting, if they don't believe in it anymore.
Exactly. And that brings us to the big question. What does all this mean for the war, for Ukraine's ability to hold on? We've talked about the individuals, the pressures they're facing, but what about the bigger picture?
Well, when you have desertion rates this high, it adds a whole other layer of complexity. Strategically speaking, it raises serious questions about Ukraine's long-term ability to resist. Can they keep this up?
Especially with no end in sight. It's one thing to ride that initial wave of patriotism, that surge of energy you get at the beginning, but years of this kind of grinding war, It's hard to imagine.
It is. And this is where the whole debate around Western aid gets really interesting. Of course, getting weapons to Ukraine is vital, but this whole situation, this desertion crisis, it highlights something else, something deeper.
You're saying it's not just about giving them the means to fight, it's about whether they can even sustain a fighting force at all.
Exactly. While Ukraine's blaming the slow pace of Western aid, saying it's making the manpower shortage worse, some analysts, well, they're saying this reliance on manpower, it's baked into their whole approach, a fundamental flaw.
So even if the weapons start flowing, even if they get everything they're asking for, the question remains, can they fix this underlying issue, this dependence on manpower? Can they build an army that can actually last?
Tough question, honestly, and with war, who knows? But one thing's for sure, both sides, they're hitting that wall, that limit of manpower. Morale, it's fragile, and keeping an army going, making them believe that's a whole other battle.
It's like this whole desertion thing. It peels back the curtain, shows you what's underneath all the speeches, all the fancy strategies. At the end of the day, it's the people on the ground. They're the ones really paying the price.
And not just in the obvious ways, right? It's the mental scars, the families torn apart, that feeling that, well, you can't trust anyone. Not really, not anymore. These things, they stick with you long after the fighting's done.
It makes you think, what will this war, what will it really cost? How will it change Ukraine, change Russia, even if they win?
Those are the questions, aren't they? It's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day, the latest news, but when you really look at something like desertion, well, it reminds you to look deeper, past the headlines, to the human cost, the part that doesn't go away. Not really. Not ever.
It's a sobering thought for sure. This deep dive into desertion, it's a stark reminder. War, it's more than just tanks and trenches. It's a battle of wills, a test of endurance, and the human cost. Well, let's just say it echoes long after the last shot is fired.